Okay. QRZ is the frequency of use. Yeah, there's my alarm on my phone telling me the meeting starts.
You're overmodulating.
Yeah, calling the meeting to order. This bill, Alpha Alpha 4 Quebec. Thanks everyone for attending. Why don't you bring up the presentation and then I can know what our agenda is. There we go. Next. Okay. So since we've got a fairly small crowd here, why don't we introduce ourselves real quick, and we'll do everybody in the room first, and then everybody online, and then we'll turn it over to Randy to give us the presentation. So again, I'm Bill, Alpha Alpha 4 Quebec. Got the second microphone, or should I stand this?
Oh, Ron, WA0KDS.
Patrick, WD9EWK.
All right, I'm Virgil, K7VZ.
Gary, KC7CS.
Mike, N7MW.
And those of you who are on the Zoom meeting, why don't you real quick unmute yourselves, say your name and call, and then turn it over to the next person.
This is Bob Hansen, NA7RH.
Larry, W07R.
Mike,
Steve, K7. Go ahead, Mike.
Mike, KC7V.
Steve, K7SP.
Lee, KY7M.
Alpha, Victor, Tango.
John, N7NWL, and Davis, AG7GB in Wickenburg.
Israel, K7NO.
Jim, KC1BB.
Okay, anybody else?
Doug, K9RZ.
And Ned, AA7A.
I think that looks like it might cover just about everybody. And Randy, November Delta Zero Charlie is going to be our speaker today. He's going to talk to us about QRP. I looked at his QRZ page. He's been working almost or basically exclusively QRP, even from his home station since 1980. So he's pretty strongly committed to this. And there was also an article written about him in the July-August issue of National Contest Journal. And I missed reading that issue, and I can't get it online, the back issues. But anyway, so Randy, why don't you go ahead and set your thing to share and go ahead and give your presentation.
Well, very good, Bob. I'll bring this thing up here if we can, and we can find it here. I got too much stuff open, I think, but we will find it somewhere here. Is my audio okay for you folks?
Yes,
Yeah, you sound real good.
Okay. Let's just see if I can find my presentation. I'm not sure, well, I can't find it here. Bear with me, guys. Hang on here a second here. We will get it. That looks familiar. Okay, are you seeing the title screen now?
Yeah, there it is.
Very good. It's amazing when it works. Obviously, I have too many things open here on my laptop. Thanks so much again for the invitation and the opportunity to speak with you folks out there this evening. I really appreciate it. And, I sure don't pretend to be an expert on this or anything for that matter, but have been playing with it for quite a few years, as was mentioned. So we'll kind of go through and I'll share a few things with you. And certainly if you've got any questions at any point in time, don't hesitate to jump in. And I'm sure that some of you have operated QRP to some degree at various times. Don't have a good way here, I guess, of finding out how many have. Hang on here, maybe I can. For those of you that are on video, could you just kind of wave or show an indication on if you have operated QRP at any time? Okay, very good. Good enough. Some folks have dipped their toes in the water. And by the way, quite a few call signs are pretty familiar here to me. At various times, I'm sure you've beat me out of in pileups. So, and I know Patrick WD9EWK pretty well from our satellite work together. So, anyway, we'll go ahead and move forward with this thing. And what I want to touch on this evening, just to kind of outline a few things, kind of going through some perceptions of QRP and why we would even want to run QRP. What sane person would want to reduce that power level? Using spots for QRP, is it good or bad? Dealing with pileups, obviously it's a crucial part of what we battle, whether we're working DX or contest. And then specifically some things on contesting with QRP, and then just how to make it work, and kind of leading into getting started in QRP for those of you that might want to give it a try if you haven't already. So without further ado, we'll jump into it. And, certainly as a disclaimer, I don't pretend to be a hotshot operator. I've had some success with QRP. I think a lot of it's just persistence and patience, but certainly anybody can be successful with QRP. I don't have a huge antenna farm. I wish I did. And we'll talk a little bit about antennas here in a bit, but I'm pretty simple here. The way the setup is, as the saying goes, just a boy and his radio. My focus in operating is DXing and contesting. So this will be primarily as QRP applies to that. And certainly, as you guys all well know, a lot of principles apply to both. And some of the things we'll touch on are certainly not unique concepts for QRP operating, but we'll touch on some of the basic things that I think lead to success with using QRP, because there's a few little tricks and of the trade that are really helpful when it comes to QRP as regular, as opposed to regular higher power operation. A little bit of background about me. As was mentioned, I've been running QRP now since 1980. I haven't figured out, I guess, that it's supposed to be difficult. And I've just never had any inclination to move away from it. I just really enjoy it. As I said, my primary interests are contesting, single sideband and CW, and usually single lop. Most often all band, but occasional single band, as I did this last weekend, in fact. My daughter and I were both operating, so we each took a separate band and had some fun that way in the CQ Worldwide. I do enjoy DXing as well. Now managed to climb up to 320 entities confirmed with QRP, and also have worked all zones on a couple different bands in different modes with QRP. So I guess if nothing else, that is an indication that it can be successful. Also enjoy summits on the air, primarily chasing, because there's not a whole lot of summits up here in the upper Midwest, but I enjoy activating summits when I get the chance. And you guys have the privilege of being in the land of summits. And of course, as I mentioned, I really enjoy satellites. I live on just a pretty typical residential lot with a 40-foot tower, a tri-bander, and some wires. And I'll show you some pictures of that in a couple of minutes here. Now, obviously, we've all heard the slogan, life is too short for QRP, but I would take issue with that. I think that not necessarily. Now, again, we all have our preferences, and I'm certainly not going to diss anybody that prefers to run high power, full legal or whatever. That's everybody's choice. But I just am one of those weirdos that enjoys QRP. Now, the question can come up then for somebody that hasn't used QRP is, can you be successful running QRP with modest antennas? And I think, I and many, many other people have demonstrated that, yes, that certainly can work. So why do it though? I think obviously there's the challenge and then the rewards that result when it works. And there is a magic to it. That sounds kind of corny, but I still feel that even after having run QRP for 42 years, it's kind of mystical and magical what you can accomplish. And for folks starting out, I recommend you're wanting to wade into this challenge is to set some reasonable goals. And there's different awards out there, of course. Some of the QRP ARCI club has awards specifically for QRP since that's their focus. And one of them is 1,000 miles per watt, which is kind of interesting and frankly not that hard to achieve. And then of course some of the basic awards, whether it be from ARL or CQ or whatever, but worked all states with QRP, WAC, DXCC, worked all zones. And then a lot of those awards that we've touched on have specific QRP endorsements on them as well. So the organizations have recognized that QRP is popular and that obviously it is more of a challenge, so they will put those endorsements on those awards. Now, as far as contesting specifically, again, it's the same thing. It's a challenge. It's a unique challenge. Obviously, with most contests having specific QRP categories, it does level the playing field that, I'm not competing against 100-watt or full kilowatt stations for awards. However, I'm still competing with those for contacts. So there's still that aspect of it. Now, but even within the QRP category, as there is with any of the categories, the variables of, antennas, who's got the best antenna farm and QTH. For a lot of these DS contests, here I am in the black hole, so to speak, of the upper Midwest. I'm at a disadvantage for the guys up in New England, working those European mults. But that's just the way it is. On the other hand, I tend to have an advantage in sweepstakes, again, because of the geography. And you guys would have an advantage over me, of course, for Pacific and Asia. That's just the nature of the beast. But that's all why we do it, right? Now, one of the things that I think is an important thing that is kind of play into this thing is a level of masochism. Certainly some people would take the point of view, you don't have to be crazy to run QRP when DXing or contesting, but that helps. So I guess just a glutton for punishment. Now, we can also kind of argue perhaps or discuss, what really is QRP? That question comes up a fair amount in the literature, in the magazines and whatever. And you'll hear different things on the air. Just recently here in the last week or so, I heard somebody say, yeah, I'm running QRP, I've got 50 watts. 10 watts is also thrown around quite a bit, or specifically 10 watts on single sideband as being QRP. My definition, I take a pretty Spartan view of it, and which is consistent with most of the contest sponsors and the awards, is that it's 5 watts or less, regardless of whether it's CW or sideband. And of course, one of the things too, it has nothing to do with antenna. So it's not effective radiated power. It's just power out of the rear of the transmitter. So it behooves us to have a good antenna system to make up for that low power level, obviously. Now, the whole thing about QRP, whether it's chasing awards, DXing, or certainly in contesting, is it really is kind of an honor system. I know there are situations where folks have really not been compliant with the QRP level, but claimed QRP in certain contests, and eventually they get busted. So you'd like to think there's some eventual justice there. Now, what I used up until the time I made the conversion, if you will, to QRP, it was just a typical medium power station. In fact, up until 1980, I was running an FT DX560, running pretty decent power. And then the power supply burned up on it, which that precipitated my decision to switch to something different. But I was just using typical tri-band or wire dipoles, and my contesting up to that point in time was largely just to pick up new countries, because I was primarily a DXer, but just like I say, dabbled in contest. When the new multipliers, the new countries pop up, a good chance to work them. But again, standard power. My first kind of foray into QRP is, I think many of us remember who Doug DeMaw was, that had designed the Tuna 10-2, a little transmitter that ran 1/4 watt on 40 meters. And so I built one of those, and I was pleasantly surprised what you could do with it. I worked both coasts on that thing, and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. But the real thing, the real trigger for me to decide to make the plunge into QRP was reading Aid Weiss's columns in QR and CQ. He had a QRP column pretty much every month for several years in CQ magazine, and I just really enjoyed reading his editorial type comments and all the reports from folks that were running QRP. And it just was leading me to think that this is something I want to try. So after my Yaesu FTDX 560 gave up the ghost, in mid-March of 1980, I bought a 10-tech Argonaut and put it on the air for the first time on the 15th of March. I can remember that day very well. Again, we all love to open up new equipment, right, to have that great smell. But here was this little 10-tech Argonaut with a massive 3-watt output. I put that thing on the air, and the first day I worked a bunch of Europeans on sideband, and I was just kind of like, wow, this is pretty cool. I like this. Now again, we were at a pretty good point in the sunspot cycle. 2 weeks later, the CQWPX sideband contest rolled around. So I thought, well, heck, I'll give that a crack on a 10-meter single band entry. And I don't remember, I didn't look it up. I worked about 70 countries that weekend. So I was sold. This QRP thing could really work, I discovered. And a few months later, I had DXCC running, again, that 3-watt level. Another thing I did is really masochistic, is I decided I wanted to see what I could do with it in a mobile situation. So I had a CB whip antenna and put it on top of the vehicle. And I have worked 89 countries with 3 watts running mobile. So that to me, that's a pretty good demonstration of when the conditions are right. You can do just about anything, with half a watt to a wet noodle. And that and also entered the ARLDX contest 1 year running mobile, and made 51 countries again on 10 meters exclusively. So it can work when the conditions are decent, and you have to choose your battles. There's no doubt about it. Now here is a picture of the station I had up until a few years ago with the Argonaut front and center. Again, running that huge 3 watts. And I at that point in time when this picture taken, I had also bought an FT897 which I ran at 5 watts. I got it primarily because it gave me some flexibility for split band operation.
Am I the only one who's lost audio?
Anybody else not hearing?
We're still hearing Randy just fine in the room.
Okay, that's
I
good.
can hear you well.
Okay, that's reassuring. It's just a one-off. Hope you can get that straightened out. But anyway, the 897 gave me the opportunity, the ability to run split on 40, for example, working some Europeans on sideband and that kind of thing. I just didn't have that flexibility with the Argonaut because it's a pretty minimalistic transceiver. But a few years ago, I was looking for a better receiver with more capabilities. So I bought a FTDX 3000, enjoying that new smell when I opened it. But it's a pretty impressive radio. That's what I'm using now. And it just sits along at 5 watts. That's where it's locked on. And I will share this with you. Sometimes people will wonder or even ask, well, do you ever increase the power? If you want to get VK9CM, for example, which would be an all-time new one for me, and I've been chasing him a little bit. And I've never even felt the temptation to increase the power, because for me, that would kind of cheapen it. I'm just stuck on that magical 5 watt maximum. So if I can't work them with 5 watts, I ain't gonna work them. That's just the way it goes. So some people might think I'm wasted a lot of the FTDX 3000, but I get the goodie out of the receiver, and it's pretty awesome. But so that's basically what my station looks like now, except that I have added a second watt meter to it, which is not showing in this picture. Any questions or comments at this point in time? I've just been jabbering away. Okay, if not, we'll move ahead. Now, 2013, I was all fat and happy and living life, and we had a freezing rainstorm followed by about 8 inches of snow, which, as you can see, was not too healthy for my antennas. You guys don't have to worry about that down there, so you're lucky. But so I put up new antennas and in fact, a new tower, because it pretty much messed up the tower with that kind of wind loading on that ice. But I'm using a Cycle 24 tribander Yagi, which a lot of people aren't familiar with. It was only manufactured by for a couple of years by a company they called themselves Cycle 24. Just kind of a little startup company, a couple guys, I think, and they made this antenna. It was acquired then by DX Engineering, but they no longer have it available. And if I had it to do all over again, I would have bought 2 of these antennas just to have one as a spare or whatever, because I think for me, it's been a great antenna. It has optimum spacing. And has dedicated elements for 20, 15, and 10, with 4 elements on 10, which is really nice because as you probably know, when 10 meters is open, that's the place to be when you're running QRP. Just anything will work, it seems like, and this really helps a ton. But this has been a good antenna. Electrically, I think it seems to function very well. and it has stood up to the rigors of the weather up here in the northern Midwest. Below that, I'm sorry, just above it rather, I've got a 40-meter dipole that's only sitting at 42 feet, but it seems to have surprising directionality. I'm surprised at it. It shouldn't be as good as it is for no higher than it is, but it does have some advantages over the wire dipole. I've got an inverted V rather with the apex at 38 feet. I feed that with ladder line. Anytime I'm running a dipole, a wire dipole, whether it's on a summit or operating portable, I like to use tuned ladder line feed. I just think it's a lot more efficient. Don't have to worry about any losses, of course. And then I do have a 6-meter Yagi sitting up above the tri-bander, and 6 meters, of course, has a well-deserved reputation as the magical band. And obviously, when it's open, QRP can function extremely well. I've got about 350 grids on 6 meters, so that works. Now, a few specific comments about QRP and just, accepting the realities of the limitations of the power level. First of all, obviously you cannot outmuscle anything or anybody. And in sort of where, so in pileups, if it's brute force, a pileup without any kind of tricks, you're going to lose out. Everything else being equal, you're just, operating QRP is going to be very frustrating. And if you're if they're in a split frequency operation, if the DX is listening up, if I'm calling just a little off frequency from where he's listening, they're not going to hear me. Whereas if you were running more power, they're going to pick up enough in the passband that they'll probably pick you up. They're just a few hundred hertz off. But obviously you cannot make your own propagation with QRP. So we have to utilize the propagation. Obviously the last few years have been a little tough for all of us. But now we've got some sunspots, things are looking good. But the challenge, of course, for all of us, whether it's QRP or otherwise, is to know which band is open and know whether it's short path or long path. So it's those little tricks. And for QRP, it's really crucial to be in the right place at the right time. And we have to accept the reality too that running QRP, you're going to be 2 to 3 S units weaker than most every other station that you're competing with in a pileup, and certainly than the stations you're calling. So trying to call a weak station, especially in a pileup, may not be very helpful. However, having said that, on clear frequencies, on quiet bands, I'm constantly amazed by what I can get through to when that other station, that DX station, is fairly weak. And it just amazes me when a quiet band, they will hear me. Now there's certain exceptions to that, but it's always worth a try. So what it boils down to really is just noise, and especially QRM, of course, like in a contest situation, that's the biggest challenge. Now, when I was tweaking this PowerPoint, it occurred to me that this question might come up. Is QRP really worth it? Is it worth the hassle? And this started to remind me of something. But so you're giving up everything you've known, giving up on everything you're used to, adjusting to a totally new way of doing things. And it reminded me of the movie Men in Black. I'm sure most of you may have seen this movie, but basically the young recruit is played by Will Smith. And as he's being recruited by Tommy Lee Jones, he asks him, is it worth it, giving up all the stuff that you've known? And Tommy Lee Jones's character Kay replies, oh yeah, it's worth it if you're strong enough. And I think there's a lot of truth to this analogy that QRP can be extremely challenging, frustrating, aggravating. It'll just break your heart. because you're not going to have the push button kind of contacts that you would running higher power. But breaking a big pileup to snag a rare DX station or a good multiplier when you know everybody, most everybody else in that pileup still calling is running some power, that's a pretty good feeling. So it's, again, it's that reward for running that low power. Now, a couple of thoughts here on using spots for QRP. I use spots for my casual DX operation. It makes me more time efficient, and I'm sure most of us use cluster spots. It helps a lot. Again, you have to have filters on in your head as far as what spot makes sense for you to try, and that's especially true for QRP. The real challenge when using spots for a QRPer is that those cluster pileups are really nasty. They're wicked. They're hard to break for QRP. And sometimes it's just a matter of coming back later when maybe things have calmed down a little bit or they've worked them down, or if it's a multiple day DXpedition. I'm not beyond trying them on the first day or two, but if they've got a good signal. However, if the signal's so-so and the pileup is just gigantic, I'm just going to come back a few days later and give them a try. And hopefully the propagation is decent. Now, for contesting, in my mind, and this is just my opinion, for QRP contesting, I think using assistance is actually counterproductive. I think the clusters are not going to be helpful to me. The reality is that during a contest, I need to find those stations, those multipliers before the packet cluster hordes descend on them. So, using a spot, I'm going to be a minute or two late, and then it's big trouble. So when I come across, so basically, as a general rule, I just never run assisted. I always run unassisted. Again, personal choice, but I think for QRP, it actually is the better way to go. So it's not some, purist, altruistic position I'm taking. I just think it's more efficient for me not to run assisted and just turn in the big dial. And going back to those old skills that we all learned many years ago. In fact, it's not too hard to recognize a cluster pileup when you come across it. I'll just make a note of the frequency and come back later. In a contest situation, I know that those big guns are going to be there the whole weekend. So I can come back on day 2 and they're going to be pretty much begging for contacts. I'm a lot better chance of breaking through rather than in the first few hours of the contest. Now, we'll talk about a few things that I think I've learned through a lot of pain and angst and mistakes about trying to break pileups with QRP, and that breaking a pileup may not be the correct term because that may be a little misleading. But first of all, it's worth a try. When you get some strong Caribbean stations, for example, I think it's always worth a try just to see if you're lucky. You can just get in. Now, and some basic principles. And again, as I mentioned early on, some of these principles apply to all of us, regardless of what power level we're running. But some of us tend to forget. But just to help make things easier for us and the DX we're trying to work is to articulate extremely well. This is something I preach to my daughter about, Kylie, who's KE0 Whiskey Papa Alpha. And it's just to really enunciate, exaggerate it. And of course, obviously using good phonetics, not goofy phonetics, but good phonetics, because, we're working DX and certainly in a DX contest, a lot of these folks, they're not native English speakers. So we need to make sure that we're enunciating well, pronouncing things well. On CW, again, a basic concept, nothing revolutionary about this, but doing just tuning off a little bit just a few cycles so we don't zero beat. So I'm not going to get just hammered by the higher power station in that pileup. And then this may seem and sound really crazy, but it seems to truly work. And I think it reflects optimism, but thinking loud. Now, that's not an original idea with me. I read that or heard that years and years ago, and I thought, oh, that's kind of dumb. But I think it makes a difference. And maybe it's reflected in your voice on sideband, but just thinking loud seems to help, as crazy as that sounds. And obviously, as we all know, too, timing of calls is everything, especially for QRP. And one thing I'm not very patient, in a pile up, as soon as he says QRZ, I tend, I think like most of us, to want to hit that mic button or hit the key, just boom, right away. But I've reminded myself of this here, and just in the last week in doing some casual DXing for some of these DXpeditions, that if I can make myself wait a second, maybe a second and a half, I can hit that gap when everybody else is done making their call. And so there's a little bit of a void there, and I can slip my short call in there and have success with that. The other thing, I've heard this so many times in contests, but also in casual DXing, that sometimes the other station will come back with a partial, say, November Delta, the November Delta station. And the station that he's calling doesn't follow up. They hesitate or something. And to me, that's a kiss of death. You've got to respond immediately, because a lot of these guys, they aren't going to give you a second or third chance. So again, kind of a common sense thing, but some of these things, again, I've been, coaching my daughter on, so they're foremost in my mind. So I'm just sharing them with you. Now, when stations are running split, which of course these DXpeditions are, I think, it sounds like no duh, but listen. And I think some of our colleagues don't listen. First of all, number one, is he listening up? Or in some rare cases, is he listening down? Because I think we've all worked stations that are actually listening down. So that'll catch you unaware. And of course, is he listening on a single frequency or a range? And sometimes it takes a while to figure that out, obviously. But as a QRPer, I need to get it figured out as quick as I can to hopefully be successful before the pileup builds. And again, this whole thing about where is he listening, if he's running split, I don't always trust the cluster spots. In fact, I think we've seen just in the last couple of days, they're quite often wrong. And so it may serve as a guide and give you a place to start listening. But the other thing is, I figure if somebody spotted a station on CW listening 1.2 kcs up, well, I figured that's where everybody's going to be calling now. So I may want to call close to that. And likewise, if I found where he's at, I don't want to try to call that exact frequency, because everybody else has found him there too, and they're going to call him there. So I need to, again, do something to separate myself frequency-wise just a little bit. And again, this comes back to this thing, don't zero beating. Now, again, I kind of touched on this, got ahead of myself a little bit. If he's listening on that range, and again, there's so many tricks to this, and I'm sure a lot of you guys could teach me a lot of things on this. I think this is still a challenge for me to try to figure out the pattern. What's he doing? Is he going up after each contact? Is he just Russian roulette just all over? Which makes it tough. And again, it is more difficult for QRP because I'm not going to be able to have as wide a frequency, as wide a passband as a louder signal would be. So he has to stumble across me pretty much right on my transmit frequency for it to work. And again, other common sense things with any DXing situation applied to running split as well as not. Now, with QRP, another movie reference, I guess here, a man's got to know his limitation, Dirty Harry. That's certainly true with QRP. And sometimes it's you have to say, well, this isn't going to work right now. I'm going to have to figure something else out. I need to find another frequency, another station to call or something. And as I say here, I think there's the difference between being persistent on it or just being, stupidly obstinate, just persisting on it, and it's not going to happen. And again, I mentioned, I don't have patience. I really have no desire to call somebody for an hour, even if it's that super rare de-expedition. I'll try to catch them on another band unless I need that particular band, but it's just another time. And especially in a contest, what I've heard, this is not original to me, is another stolen idea, but I found this to be true so many times, is I may be in some huge pileup, say for just a TG9 multiplier, Guatemala, and there's a huge pileup, and I'm not having any luck getting through, and I'll say, well, forget it, and I'll tune away maybe 10, 15 kilohertz, and son of a gun, there's another TG9 all by himself that hasn't been spotted. So again, turning that big knob in the middle isn't a bad thing. Now, when I try to discipline myself not to get immersed into a pileup when it's just not going to be productive, again, common sense, I suppose, but the pileup is huge. Now, I'm not scared of a big pileup. Maybe I should be, but I've had pretty dumb good luck getting through big pileups, but the DX station's loud. So I've got good propagation, obviously. But in these situations, like I'm mentioning here, if the DX is weak and the pileup is huge, we need to pick a different time, wait an hour or whatever. And of course, the realization that in most cases, these DX stations are running pretty good power. And so I'm only running 5 watts, so I need to factor that into the formulation too. So I'm not beyond just writing it down, the frequency, and coming back later. Again, this isn't rocket science, right? Another time I won't mess with a pileup if these big pileups are just very unruly, like that would ever happen, right? But it's just like, no way. And sometimes when the DX station, it doesn't really have his or her act together and isn't controlling the pileup. That's frustrating for everybody. And also, as I mentioned before, if you got a big packet cluster pileup, I tend to stay away from those, although the necessity may require that I jump in those, but if it's a de-expedition or something that I need. As I mentioned, if you've got a poor DX operator on the other end, that's not controlling the pileup, but also if he doesn't ID, and especially in a contest situation, I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to figure out who what the call sign is. I'll come back later and check it, but it's so frustrating. I think we've all been there. So this is independent of whether you're running QRP or not, but it's so much fun to listen and listen and listen, and spend a minute or two on a frequency in a contest, and the station finally IDs, and of course it's one you've already got. So that's awesome. That's fun. And as I mentioned before, in contests, I'm typically not going to spend very much time on a pileup on a big gun DX station early on in the contest. Now, if they're loud, and I think that I know this station by reputation, I've worked them before in previous years, they're good. They hear well, so I'll give them a call and surprise myself sometimes. Delta 4 Zulu, any of the Cape Verde stations, when they get on whatever call sign they're using, man, they hear extremely well. Even on the low bands, I just get them in 1 or 2 calls, and it's mystifying to me, but they're good. Now, a few Murphy's laws, specifically for running QRP. you will get beat out in pileups, and you will get beat out often, kind of as we've talked about. And you, in most cases, you better forget about trying to run. And if you are able to start or run, you probably are not going to be able to hold the frequency. You're going to get bumped off the frequency. And typically, I mean, I've tried running 10, 15, and 20, even, well, sometimes the sweepstakes, the low bands too, and had some success. But and we'll touch on, you know, some optimum times to try to run in contests, but just recognizing the fact that there are limitations on that. And this is what's really disheartening. You will get CQ'd in your face, especially on the low bands, and this will happen often. And I got CQ'd in my face this last weekend on 15 meters. As I mentioned, I went single band on 15, and boy, I was able to snag Mongolia, which is a pretty good catch from here with QRP on single sideband. And I heard several Chinese stations, and they just CQ'd in my face. They're all alone, not responding to anybody, and I cannot get them. And that's, but again, that's the reality of QRP. And another aspect of it for contests or even casual stuff, they may not get it all the first time. So you will get asked for repeats or fills. And that will happen often, especially on the low bands in contests. 40 and 80, that's no place for the weak-hearted running QRP. Now, my kind of corollaries to these things are, we should not fear the big pileups. Again, using some judgment in how we address them. And in fact, as I mentioned, there may be times you can run. If 10 or 15 is really open, like they were this last weekend, I think it's worth it to try a few CQs, especially on 10. You've got a big band going up towards the top, calling CQ, and that's sometimes worked out very well, but it's worth a try. Now, on the other hand, if you're having a good rate with search and pounce, then I stay with that. Sometimes I can have very good rates with search and pounce, and I'm just, you know, going up and down the band and having fun. So, but you certainly, if you're going to try to call CQ and do some running, you better feel loud. You need to feel loud. And there's sometimes when the propagation just shifts, and I do feel loud. And regardless of the band, sometimes whether it be 10, 15, 20, or 40, I just feel loud. And it's just, you know, obviously it's a freak of propagation, but I'll take it. And the big thing is, whether, you know, or no matter what power you're running, but certainly with QRP, it's easy to get discouraged. But I've come to the conclusion after a lot of calculations and really thinking on it, you won't get any contacts if you turn the radio off. So it's that old button share time. Now, some things specifically for contesting on rates versus mults. And this, again, is kind of common sense. This would apply regardless of power level, but it's especially true for QRP, that if you're having pretty good success, you know, with your search and pounce, then, you know, I don't want to waste my time in a huge pilot for a multiplier that I may not be able to get, and at the end of the day may not be worth any more points to me than a lot of search and a lot of common ones. In other words, if I'm working Italians, you know, front and back, and just, you know, working them one after another, and I hear some really weird, rare European multiplier, if it's a big pileup, I'm just going to stay working the Germans and the Italians and the Spaniards. One thing too, a couple things actually that I remember reading from Don Miller, the infamous W9WNV. First one is, don't chase DX when you're contesting. And for a DXer, that can be a difficult thing to do. But, you know, one of the things that he mentioned, and it's common sense, but it's kind of hard to discipline myself anyway. If I hear that second Chinese station, I've already worked China, and oh my gosh, I hear another one. I want to jump on and get him too. And so I may waste 10, 15 minutes doing that. But the reality is he's not worth any more than the second JA QSO. So again, disciplining yourselves and not DXing unless that's what you want to do when you're contesting. One of the important things, especially when you're running QRP, because I'm going to be weak, right? I'm going to be weak for that other guy. But one of the things I've heard on the air, it's a pitfall to avoid, I think, especially when you're running QRP because they're not hearing you well, is if the other station, the DX station, gets your call right initially, don't resend it. Because that, in fact, is going to imply that they didn't get it right, but now they're hearing something. You're giving your call sign. They're not quite sure what they said because, again, they're not hearing you well. So then it just starts a vicious cycle of trying to get the call correct when in reality, they had it correct the first time. Another thing that's related directly to this is if a station comes back and says, was that November Delta Zero Charlie? And if I make the mistake of saying, yes, QSL November Delta Zero Charlie, why do I need to give them the call sign again when they already had it correctly? They're just asking for confirmation that's correct. So QSL or Roger suffices. If I give them my call again, then that implies that they did not get it right the first time. And again, keep in mind, they're not hearing me well. So now they're, well, was it November Golf Zero Charlie? Because a good friend of mine is 30 miles away here in Minnesota with that call sign. And so it could just add to unnecessary confusion. Another thing, it's kind of a pet peeve for me, but in contests, I never announce as QRP. First of all, they don't care. They really don't care. And it just takes more time. With a sideband or CW, it's an unnecessary thing. And I don't think it'll get you through a pileup any better. I suppose the thinking is they may hear a part of the QRP and, oh, there's QRP in there. But in fact, I don't even do that for casual DXing. I used to years and years ago, I did. But I just think it's a waste. An interesting thing I heard in the contest this last weekend in a pileup, not just somebody saying QRP, but I heard somebody announce low power. And again, he didn't get replied to, but I'm just not sure of the value of that. So anyway, I'll get off my pulpit there and we'll move on. Again, as I mentioned before, using phonetics, especially with QRP, because I'm not punching through. I don't have a big signal, so I need to really use good phonetics and emphasis on the standard phonetics, not getting cute. Again, knowing the propagation, as we mentioned before, especially important for contesting, is a long path versus short path. And also, even though I don't have real big beam here, but it does make a difference to have that beam heading correct. And of course, then what follows on that, the qualifier is being aware of some skew headings, skew beam headings. We now and then hear those on 10 or 15 and sometimes even 20, as you guys know, but for QRP, that makes all the difference in the world. Now, when I do pretty much all search and pound. So I am just tuning, always stay on the move. I typically start at the high end of the band. That's where things, again, as we all know, are going to be thinner, not as much QRM. And I just seem to have success doing that. And again, some of these thoughts are certainly not unique to QRP, but they're especially helpful when running QRP. And then again, like I touched on before, alluded to, finding and working the lonely ones, even if they're weak, because they haven't been spotted yet. They don't want anybody calling them. So those are the ones you can snag running QRP. And as I also mentioned before, sometimes there's some lonely stations that would just love to have you call them, just a few kilohertz away from the big pileups. It's worth looking. And as I've touched on, don't ignore those weak stations calling CQ, because if there's no QRM, you can get them. A lot of times these stations are just really typical stations, probably running barefoot. So they're not running kilowatts. I'm not, if they're running a kilowatt and I can barely hear them, then forget it. But a lot of these cases, the reason they're weak is because they're running barefoot, and I can get those guys. And again, the time you spend in the chair is essential. For QRP especially, I need to figure out where I'm the loudest. There's, the propagation will shift, and especially with QRP, I can tell that, boy, nobody's hearing me. I'm not getting through. 15 minutes ago, I was getting folks I was calling. Now it's shifted. I can't get anybody, so I need to change bands. On the other hand, if I'm having good luck, I need to stay on that band. And sometimes there's been times in the past where I've had to literally force myself to move from a band that was really doing well, but just to check for molts. Several years ago, I think it was 2013, had a pretty good CQ Worldwide contest on sideband, and just spent a lot of time on 10 meters because it was wide open, well above 29 megahertz. But I had to force myself to go to 10 and 15 because I was running all band just to make sure I wasn't missing some molt. So again, it's always hard to know where you should be, especially when you're not running with assistance. And again, with QRP being on that high band that's open. I'm kind of a slow learner, I guess, but on 40 and 80, which I basically despise, especially sideband with QRP, but I need to go there to get the mults for contesting. But I haven't figured out a rhyme or reason to when 80 is going to be open, when I can feel loud and have success versus 40. It's just, I just have to try them. And after a while, it's not working. So go to the other one on the two, between the two low bands. And at night, just occasionally checking 20, who knows? Now, as we kind of wrap up here, and I appreciate your time and patience with me, it's fair to say that after 42 years of doing this, I continue to be amazed by what can be done with just 5 watts. It blows me away. Now, it's definitely not push button. There's no confusing that. But to me, personal choice, it exemplifies the magic of radio. That's why I keep doing it. I just keep loving it. It hasn't gotten old for me, despite the occasional frustrations, etc. Now, as some of you have no doubt done, as far as playing around with QRP, you don't need a dedicated QRP rig. There's some good QRP rigs out there, but most of these newer rigs, full power rigs, excuse me, 100, 200 watt rigs, most of those will drop down to 5 watts. So then you can play and just give it a try. And there's been a lot of times when I've just been casual DXing and, having, a little bit of a chat, 3 or 4 minute chat with the DX station and mentioning that I'm running QRP and I give my power level, and then they get all excited. It's as much fun for them as it is for me, the fact that they've worked a QRP station, but then they want to try it. So they will cut their power to see how their signal is. So I figure in those situations, I'm getting converts to QRP, maybe. But again, choosing your battles. But I think if you give it a try, you will be surprised with the kind of success you have. And don't forget that secret of thinking loud. Now, a word about antennas. I think sometimes some people think that QRP means poor antennas. It's synonymous with poor antennas. Now, obviously, if we have poor antennas, that is going to make us weak. But there's nothing about QRP or the definition of QRP that says we cannot have good antennas. So the corollary to that is I want to have a good antenna to make as much use of that 5 watt little signal I'm squeaking up the antenna or up the coax. So I'm going to do everything I can to maximize my effectiveness and efficiency with my antenna. As we've talked about, the antenna I'm using, it's not a monster by any means, but it seems to be very efficient. It's well tuned, and I love the 4 elements on 10 meters. That's great. And of course, we want to, again, this is not unique to QRP again, but it's especially important for QRP. I need to get as much of my signal up to the antenna as possible. So I need to minimize those losses. I need good quality coax. And similarly, for my dipoles, as I mentioned, I use open line, ladder line feeders with an antenna tuner. I can just, pretty much negate any antenna or any feed line loss that way. And I think it does make a difference. So that's just, again, personal opinion, but that's, I think I can justify it. The most important thing I would suggest is give it a try. Turn that power down and jump in and play around with it. I think you will be surprised. That's all I've got for the formal presentation. But I would certainly entertain any questions, and I'm going to quit sharing here too. If I can bring up the Zoom.
If any of y'all either in the room or on the Zoom call have any questions, ask now.
Yeah, I have one.
Yes, sir.
I've done a little informal QRP work, and one of the problems you get into, at least I do, because the way I do it in my girth equipment, is I measure the output in a very funny way. I have an SDR radio, and it has a nice little graph and bar, and so you can, figure that out. And I worked with the engineers. I actually emailed them, and they said my methodology was sound. And I measured about, depending on the band, about 4.8 watts or so. But I'm just wondering, is that just too informal to claim? I mean, I kind of to myself say, yeah, I did it, but do I claim that to the world, or is that just too shaky?
No, I think that's perfectly legitimate, and I think that's a lot better than most people or than many people do when they, are saying they're running QRP. So no, I think to me that sounds good. You don't need my approval, but I think that seems very reasonable and very legitimate.
Okay, thanks.
And I'm glad to hear you playing around with it. That's awesome. Any other questions I can try to answer, or any comments? Share your observations, your experiences.
Randy, I was just going to ask you if you have any one or two most memorable DX. What were those main one?
Now, there's been a few. I think one of my favorite, Father Moran in Nepal, and I cannot remember his call sign. I apologize.
981M.
Yeah. So I've got that going for me, right? I got a God bless you from Father Moran. So that's what, but it's there've been a lot of fist pumping type occasions, and it's just a rush.
That's great. Good story.
Any other questions or comments about your experiences?
Okay, I'll share something with you. This Bill at AA4Q again. You have 2 black and white pictures on your QRZ page. Those are my favorite kind of ham radio pictures, is the teenage me pictures. I've got one of myself also. Right around the time those pictures were taken, I was in Florida. That's why there's a 4 in my call. And I actually had a beam up about 30 feet. And I had a TS520. The TS520's got a switch on the back to turn off the amplifier and an output to drive a transverter. And I had no way of measuring it, but I assumed it was 5 milliwatts. So I rigged up an antenna switch so that basically I was operating 5 milliwatts on 15 meters, and I made several QSOs up into the central US or the Midwest somewhere one day when 15 was really open. So that was, I hope I didn't just drop off because our video got choppy, but
Yeah,
that was my most miles per milliwatt experience with QRP.
well, that's amazing. That's incredible. That's super. That ought to get you hooked for good. There was a guy, and I don't know if he's still alive, W8 India Lima Charlie. I think he was in Ohio, and he was one of the first real QRP DXers that I had ever heard about. And this would have been back in the late 70s. Adrian Weiss used to talk about him in his articles, but he had his Argonaut factory modified to run no more than 1 watt. He worked 200 countries at 1 watt. But 5 milliwatts, that's impressive. That's very cool. I think it's amazing. There was a time several years ago, there was a Russian doing a de-expedition down in San Andreas, I think. I can't remember, one of the Caribbean islands, one of the rarer ones. And I'd been following him around on his de-expedition and working him with the 5 watts. And so one night he says, well, how low can you go? And at that point, I had no way of going less than 5 watts with what I was running. But I went and grabbed my FT817, which I had for soda operations, and it worked him, easy with 1 watt, which is the low I could go there. So I think we would all surprise ourselves by what we can do with what minimal power levels when the conditions are right.
Anybody else? Oh, go ahead.
This is Tom, NQ7R, Casa Grande. This is a little off the subject, but I think, if you listen to the worldwide beacons, it's amazing when you can hear them go from 100 to 10 to 1 to 1/10 of a watt, and you can still copy them. So it's really, as you say, it's amazing what low power can do.
Yep. No, you're exactly right. I think that's a good point worth mentioning. And of course, that reminds me too of the satellites and what we're able to do with extremely low output to get up to the satellites, and what low powered transmitters those satellites have to get back to us. Now, obviously, they've got a pretty good elevation, but I think again, it's another demonstration of it doesn't take a ton of power if the conditions are favorable.
Yeah, NQ7R again. Do you chase any soda stations?
Oh yeah,
Summertime?
I'm a soda addict. Yeah, I've been chasing soda stations or summits since I think 19 seems like that 2012. I've got I think about 30,000. I've got about 32,000 chaser points, and I just love it. And the nice thing about chasing summits is that when the propagation is really poor, so DXing is out of the question, at least for a QRPer, I can always look for soda summits. So that carries me over in the dry spells.
Yeah, that's right. I got started, I guess, about the same time you did. And it amazes me when the JAs get on 20 meters or 15 running QRP. And there's a guy down in New Zealand that seems to always hear my soda contacts. I've done a little bit of soda work with 5 watts. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, it really is fun. It really is fun. And I've been able to activate a few summits too. And again, always with QRP, but that's that's a blast. That's the, and again, that demonstrates what you can do with low power with just a dipole when you're up at 10,000, 12,000 feet. I'm pretty sure we have worked.
Yeah, I'll have to check my log.
Any other questions or comments? I'd be glad to stay with you till the cows come home, as they say, but you guys probably have lives, but I'll stay here as long as you'd like.
Thank you so very much for your presentation. And I also want to thank you for the 28 contacts I had during the POTA with you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, this is Ron, W0KDS. I was born and raised in your part of the country around Minnesota. And I have a story that you probably have a club station there called W0HQ. 7 Ron Whitnell, Robert.
Get away from me.
You're a little distorted there. I think you're asking about a club station.
Oh, okay. I'll back off the mic here.
There you go.
Hopefully. Okay. I was gonna say that there's a W0VHQ club station now that was originally George from Steen, Minnesota. Anyway, back in the early mid 60s, when I kind of got involved in amateur radio, he got a sample transistor, I guess, where he was working there in Yarra Woods in Laverne. So he brought it home that night, hooked up a crystal to it, made a little oscillator, and probably put out less than 100 milliwatts. And he worked on now in Ohio or someplace. So that kind of made everybody look up, and that's when tubes were the big thing yet. Other than that, that's about it. But I think the W0VHQ is a club station either in, I want to say, I think it's QBI is the one in Worthington. And then I think this one may be in northern Iowa someplace. And
Okay.
that's about it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. Yeah, you and I are similar vintage. My original call was WA0 Victor Bravo Whiskey. So you've got me by a little bit there, but those were the good old days, no doubt about it. But that's amazing. You know what? Again, a good demonstration of simple and low power can make it happen. The video's frozen up here a little bit. I don't know if you're still hearing me. Okay, now we're going.
Are you working sweepstakes this weekend? Is mine on?
No, I'm actually gonna be out of state this weekend, unfortunately, so.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions on anybody else need the microphone in the room, or any other questions on the computer? So typically what we do at this point is we'll take a little bit of break here in the room, and somebody brought cookies. You should have been here to join us. And in about 5 minutes, we'll reconvene and we'll go through our business meeting. Really fun stuff like the treasurer's report and a few other things. So you're certainly welcome to stay as long as you like. I know you're about 2 hours ahead of us. It's getting a little late there, but maybe it's time for you to get on 40 meters or 80. But anyway, thanks so much for presenting to us. This was very interesting, and hopefully I'll hear you on the air sometime soon. But not likely, since I don't turn on the radio very often these days.
Well, it's been my pleasure, everybody. And again, thanks for listening. And hopefully there were a few little tidbits there that might be helpful and might entice you to give QRP a try if you haven't already. And if anybody's got a question or wants to reach out to me, my contact information on qrz.com. So thanks a bunch, and 73 to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Some of it was quite a bit of
Okay.
it. Really interesting.
Let's reconvene at about 8:20.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank you. Appreciate it, guys.
Yeah.
and gals. Take care.
We'll be back.
It's about 8:20. Let's get through the rest of this meeting real quick. Okay, treasurer's report, Mike, N7MW.
Yes, right now we have the grand total of a little over $8,700 on hand, including some petty cash. The only expenses right now are the room rent. I will be starting to collect dues. I'll put out a notice on that later this month and we'll get started on that. Thing about dues is we do this through February, and by the end of February, anybody that hasn't paid in will be dropped from the roster. But I'll start that. I'll put out a notice on the reflector as well as direct emails for that. And the two ways to pay are checks to CADXA, either mailed directly to me at my house or to the club PO. And I do have a personal PayPal account that I can use for this as well. So anybody that wants to get a jump on that, you can start sending checks to the PO box or to me. I'd appreciate that. It's nice that it doesn't all come at once. Thank you. Our cash can be taken, yes.
Okay. Yeah, it just occurred to me. I got 25 in my wallet. Okay. So again, during the next couple of months, we got to get our dues in. And next one. Okay. Our club is running the DXCC report again. Israel, the ham formerly known as Kilo 7 Hotel India, has taken over the database maintenance, and he's got a pretty slick system. If you go to our club website and find across the yellow strip across the top, find DXCC totals, that pops up the page, which if you click on the DXCC totals, you get a PDF of the latest version of it, listing all the club members and what their totals are, broken out by bands and so on. And if you click on the bottom one, the spreadsheet, you get a blank spreadsheet you can download. Did you take away my QR code? Or do I not have it there? No, I don't have it on this page. Okay, you get a blank spreadsheet you can download, fill it out, and email it back. In the lower left of the slide, you'll see the email address we set up on Gmail, which is only used for this DXCC total stuff. So it looks like that'll be live again, and we'll be able to track each other and see how we're doing. And when you see, next time he updates it and you see my results, you'll wonder why you guys picked me as the president of a DX club. I did.
It is updated as of tonight.
Yeah. Okay. And the next one. Okay, the banquet. That QR code up in the top, if you take out your phone and take a picture of it, it should take you straight to the website. We, on the board, spent the last several months of board meetings discussing over and over again how we could set up a banquet. We've skipped a couple of years because of the stupid pandemic thing, but we really want to have a banquet. We want to give out our DXer of the Year award. But with turnout being so light, we're concerned that if we put down a deposit for 100 people, a 50% deposit or something, we'd use a big chunk of the treasury and we might end up losing it because we wouldn't have enough turnout. And we're commiserating with one of the other clubs, the Scottsdale Club, and they said they've got the same kind of problem. They're not sure how big a turnout they're going to get. But they were teamed up with Marca, W7MOT anyway, and they invited us to go along with them. And if you click on that website or the QR code, you can see what their menu that they've lined up at this buffet on the casino. And it looks, there's more than 20 items there. The only important ones are prime rib and assorted desserts. So I'm most likely going to go. In fact, I probably have to be there to give out the DXer of the Year award, don't I? But anyway, so this will be December 9th, 6 p.m. They've arranged a speaker, healthcare electronics, So that should be interesting. It's at one of the casinos. It's next to Scottsdale, so it's not far to drive. And hopefully this will work out good for us. It'll also have the added advantage that we'll be able to meet members of other clubs that you may or may not already know. I was involved in Marca for many years, so I still know some of those guys, but Scottsdale, it's been years since I've been a member. But more importantly for us, I guess, is since we're a special purpose kind of a club, we'll be able to tell their members about our club, and maybe some of them will want to take an interest in HF and DXing. Okay, don't know if I put that on the slide or not, but he said no walk-ins, so we got to prepay, and we'll do it on their website. So everything is taken care of by them for us. Another big advantage that this arrangement has to the board. And interrupt me if you guys have any questions. Otherwise, go on to the next slide. Okay, nominating committee. It consists of K7 BHM, N7 NWL, and K7 RD. If you are interested in serving one of the officer positions, contact one of them, and we'll be sending out regular emails and Slack messages about it if you don't want to memorize what they're which guys are on the committee. But it's basically the two members at large, and BHM is always on the committee. So it's kind of nice to have new people involved in the board. If you haven't ever served again, or if it's been years that you've served, there's always a few openings that are available, and you can discuss with them which openings are going to be available and they haven't filled yet. So I'm already committed to be recent past president for next year. So that frees up the president position if any of y'all are interested. Next slide. The Visalia Committee. When you look at the Visalia website, which is also there, I found this QR code generator website, so I had fun making 2 QR codes for today's presentation. You'll see that CADXA is, our logo is at the bottom as one of the co-hosts of this, along with Northern California DX Association. 3 of our guys, Mike, Larry, and Ned, are on the committee that's arranging everything, arranging the speakers, arranging the rooms, arranging the food, arranging the prizes, and they're getting a lot done. Things are progressing smoothly. And Ned is on this meeting, and so is Larry. So if you all have any questions for them, speak up now or ask them before we end the meeting, but or contact them afterwards. It's April in Visalia, so that's progressing well. Next one. Okay, is there any other club business, either from the floor in the room or from the Zoom meeting, that you'd like to bring up to the entire club while we're all here?
I have a question, Ray, N6VR.
Okay.
Yeah, I missed it on the slide. Is there a deadline for the Scottsdale Club for that banquet? A deadline to request or purchase a reservation before the 9th?
Yeah. Okay. When you go to their website, which is on that QR code, and also just search for Scottsdale Amateur Radio Club. It's like scottsdalearc.com, I think it was.
I took a picture of it. I just want to know what the deadline was to reserve a seat.
There's more information there. I couldn't get it all on the slide, but if there is, oh well, if it is, it might be on their website, but try to get it in at least a week ahead of time so they can do their compilations. There we go.
Yeah, Bill, Steve, K7SB.
Sir.
Yeah. Do you know if the Scottsdale Senior Center is back open, and I don't know what we paid for room rental there. Are we thinking of going back to there at some point? So just some, I guess, requests for info.
We discussed that numerous times in board meetings, and I honestly can't remember what the last thing we talked about was. Was it one of you guys that would drive by? Okay, yeah, they didn't have staff in the evenings, so we couldn't use them for evening meetings. But it's pretty much once we locked in this church, we quit wondering when they would open back up there. But I think we did determine that once they are open again, we might be able to use one of the rooms for a banquet. But the way things worked out, this multi-club banquet probably works out better for us this year.
I would add as another board member that I like the Bethany, even though I'm not there tonight, I like the Bethany venue a lot better. The room's bigger, the facilities are overall nicer. So I'm kind of in favor of staying with the church anyway, other than as Bill pointed out, the potential for holding banquets there. Plus which the renewals are goofy. And, the members don't have any visibility to that, but they'll let you reserve things out like 3 or 4 months at a time. And our treasurer works hard enough, I mean, if we got a better shot here, then why not stick with it? And I mean, it's just a better deal, really.
Thing about the senior center down there, their hours are now Monday to Thursday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Okay.
And Friday to 5 p.m. So unless you wanted to have a really condensed meeting, they would be shooting us out.
Yeah, I only attended a few of the meetings when we were at senior center, and I didn't like that room very much. Yeah, but we had a bigger crowd then. If we put 40 people in this room, it'd start to feel small too. But why don't you guys start coming live to our meetings, and we can perform that experiment and see. Any other questions or business from the floor, or anything else you guys want to talk about? Oh yeah, we still got Tom. That's right. Okay, Tom, are you set up and ready to share your spreadsheets?
Yes, I think I'm all ready.
Make him a presenter.
Okay, let's take a few minutes to make sure we get the presenter thing sorted out. Participants down at the lower center, isn't that it? Okay, I think he just made you co-host. Tom, go ahead and see if you can share now.
Okay, let's see. Okay, hopefully you've got the spreadsheet up now.
Okay, it's visible now.
Yeah, well, I don't have a whole lot to cover. Not a lot of change. I'm sure everybody's been busy, so this is the current spreadsheet I have for the DX challenge. Again, K7SP is just running away pretty impressive scores all across the band. And for 50 watts, that's pretty remarkable in my view. So again, I've had a little trouble, I think, with my Juno email account getting stuff sent out. So lately, I've been just going directly to the Groups IO site and putting stuff there. Another our triple play again, not too much change. Jim has increased a little bit on his digital count. HF marathon still looking very good. What do we have here? 5 stations over 200. I think that's pretty remarkable, and I'm sure others will increase that number. On the de-expedition front, I haven't heard from Rick, but he's got a pretty substantial lead. I imagine he's worked the TY0 and the D60 several times. Looks like I'm getting shut out on the J28. Let's see what else. 6 meter, of course, the van's pretty well shut down. Although I think mid-December may pick things up a little bit. The last 2 things here, I have to admit, even I haven't tried too many new modes, but I have 5 that I've done. And the alphabet soup, that's pretty well been taken care of as well. So if somebody has more data, send it in any time. Doesn't have to be before the next meeting. And as I mentioned before, I think it's time maybe somebody else can take over next year. So with that, I'll close things down and turn it back to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Tom. And yeah, okay. Okay, so this is scottsdalearc.org/Christmas-party. And the information is all here. When you scroll down, there's the sign up thing and the list of the buffet. So it's December 9th. So hopefully, let me see, this is our November meeting. Board hasn't decided what we're going to do for a December meeting. I think we're going to hold a meeting, but we may not have a speaker. Do we have a speaker for December? Okay. Oh, it's January, the one we won't have a speaker. Okay, so we will be holding a December meeting. Okay.
And then December 9th will be the banquet.
Okay. Anything else before we end the meeting? Nothing heard. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody, for attending, and we'll see you next month, twice.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.